Well, this is the J&J show, I guess. Welcome, Julie and Jenny, to the Leaders Who Care series. It's now this is Canadian. It's lovely to have you here, eh?
Yes, for sure.
For
Thank you.
sure.
We're excited to be here.
Actually, my son does FOSHO for show, which is for sure, apparently.
That's
So
awesome.
no, I'm super excited to have you both here and tell an important story with a lot of experience and joy and drama and everything behind a great story. And so, if we could start by, here's the keyword, briefly introducing yourself. I remember Jay Leno would tell Robin Williams, Robin, all I have to do is say, "Hey, Robin," and then the rest was history. It's like on to it. So we're not doing that, but if you can introduce yourself more on the personal side. I mean, a lot of this is personal, I know, but on the personal side of where you are, where you're from, family, something maybe that you've never told everybody you want to reveal now, that'd be cool. And stuff like that. And then we'll get into all this stuff. So rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Who wants to go first?
Oh, I'll start.
Go for it.
So I'm Julie Lewis, and I'm from Seattle. And most of my adult life, I've been working in public health, both locally and abroad. And I have 3 kids. They're all grown adults with children. So I'm a grandma of 6 right now. And I don't know that there's going to be a 7th. I think almost everyone's finished. I guess what's made my life unique, my giant pivot in my life was in 1990 when I found out that I was HIV positive. From a blood transfusion I had actually received 6 years earlier when so in 1984, when my oldest daughter was born. And that pretty much changed everything from that point on in my life. I was given 3 to 5 years to live, and not very optimistically. It was like, if you're lucky, you might possibly live 3 to 5 years. At the time, my kids were 2, 4, and 6 years old. So as a young mom with a disease that had a lot of opinions and baggage that went with it, in the early 90s, we lived in a very conservative town in Eastern Washington State. And so for quite a while, we just actually didn't tell anyone because there was so much stigma and discrimination around HIV at that time.
Can I hold you right there for a second?
Yeah.
Because that's a good start, and then we'll come back to that. How's that?
Perfect. Yes,
Awesome.
This is what we're going to be talking about. So
exactly. But thanks. That's a great intro. Jenny.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Jenny Koenig. I'm also from Seattle, currently living in Los Angeles and enjoying the sun. I have a daughter who's 7 months old now, so that's kind of is the most new and exciting thing in my life, kind of figuring out how a child fits in. I was a photographer, then I became a music video and commercial producer. I have a Grammy nomination, but nobody wants to hear me sing, I can tell you that much. And then now I'm getting into writing, as has been kind of my lifelong passion. So it's been a very roundabout way to end up here. And I'm here today because I co-authored Julie's memoir with her. And Julie's been a friend for a long time, so it was a really good fit. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Very well done, you guys. So I like to ask, what were you each like as a kid or teenagers? Were you doing like comedy skits? Were you playing sports? Were you playing music? Were you writing? Were you taking photos, videos? Were you volunteering? What were you each like as kids? Julie?
I feel like I was much more boring than any of that. I was the youngest of 4 kids. I came along, my sisters and brothers are all a year apart, and then I was like 5 years later. So I was the add-on kid. I was like an only kid for a long time. So really, my parents just put me in activities, like as many as they could find, because I think by the time I came around, they were so tired of parenting. So I was in ballet and gymnastics, and I was the cheerleader at one point. I was the dance, the drill team director. I mean, just anything. I did a lot of things by myself. I was a really independent child. Yes, but it wasn't all that exciting. No, I think the most interesting thing in my childhood is for 4 years, we lived in the Marshall Islands. My dad was the superintendent of schools on a small island in the Pacific where World War II was fought. It's now a missile test site. So that was that. And we traveled a lot in the 60s to other countries. So that kind of gave me a worldview that maybe other children in the 60s didn't have. I grew up in Central Washington. So
super cool. I've heard of bonus kids. When you have step kids, they call them bonus kids.
Bonus kids, that's awesome.
Yeah,
My dad would say I'm the best mistake he ever made. That was his claim to fame.
yeah, I love the way you said an add-on kid. It reminded me, and I love when people don't say step kids, they say bonus kids or bonus moms and stuff like that. It's actually really cool. What about you, Jenny, as a kid?
So I grew up outside of Seattle in Gig Harbor, Washington, and I actually spent a lot of time making videos. This was the 90s. I had my parents' like giant camcorder, and my friends and I would take songs, we'd make music videos out of them. We would make cooking shows. My favorite one that we did was
I've never heard this. This is awesome.
Yeah, we did a weight loss video in which like we all put my dad's sweats on and like stuffed as much stuff under there, so we all looked huge, and like kind of like, you know, did some jumping jacks and stuff, and then you know, turn the camera off and then turn it back on when we had like taken all of the stuff out. So, you know, we had lost weight and were suddenly incredibly skinny. Anyway, yeah, so I did a lot of that as a child. And so in some ways, my, you know, what I do now makes sense. I think the thing that I want to point out is I had amazing parents who were both teachers and who told me that I could be anything that I wanted to be when I grew up. You know, and a doctor, lawyer, like I could own a business, I could be the first female president. But never once did they say like, oh, you could make films, or you could, you know, you could make music videos. Like, as much as time I spent watching MTV, I never thought like there are people who that's their career. And so I love that I've kind of ended up in this world in a roundabout way. And yeah, all that to say is, you know, when you're telling your kids that they can be anything, don't forget about, you know, some of the more creative professions.
Yes, I wanted to be a hockey player, then own a hockey team and stuff, and then I was going to be a broadcaster. Changed my name to Mark Jansen and tested my voice, and I can do that. And then I went into accounting because my mom thought that was the safe thing to do, and it was like the crazy thing to do. I hated it, but I did all right after at the end of it. So so I can get it. So tell us a little bit about your early journeys before what we're getting into. So your motivations around the type of education you got, you know, what future you were looking at based on that you thought, and how did you guys meet?
Well, I also came from a family of educators. My dad was, when I was born, he was a high school principal. He'd been a history teacher, and then he became superintendent of schools for most of my life. And my mom was a grade school secretary. So our whole entire existence revolved around the local schools, which I became a teacher. I became a science health teacher, and then found my passion in actually public health. But I enjoy kids, especially teenagers. I think I was just born at the high school practically, and that's where they toted me around to. And so I think that really influenced who I am now, and my confidence in presentations, and also just my value of educating people, whether it's about healthcare or many things. So, and Jenny and I, why don't you answer the first part of the question, then we'll tell you how we met.
Yeah. So I went to UW, and I have an intellectual history degree, or if you're from UW and know, it's CHID, Comparative History of Ideas, and then an African Studies minor. And so it's really funny that there's so many things that I don't think necessarily that my degree applies to that I do in life. But then when we get into the volunteering and stuff like that I'm really passionate about, like actually that's what my degree was made for.
Yeah.
It's funny how
So,
we don't necessarily know how something's going to apply, but maybe we apply it, and maybe there's, I'm not getting into religion or whatnot, maybe there is a thing happening to prepare us for what's going to happen.
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah,
And
it's
I
true.
went the route of education of just picking to study what I was interested in. So kind of the opposite of you, Mark, and your mom wanting you to be an accountant. When I was in college, my parents are like, "And what are you going to do with this degree?" But I enjoyed it, and I learned a ton. And also that's actually where I met Teresa, Julie's daughter. And we immediately bonded, became best friends. And so that's how I met Julie way back now, like 20 years
It's
ago.
20, almost 21 years. Yeah, it was a while ago.
Man, they said it wouldn't last. What did they know? Jeez.
Yeah.
So Jenny and I, over the last 15 years, have shared several jobs. We for a while mentored college students at UW, and all of the women we mentored lived in this big mansion with an industrial kitchen. So every Wednesday we would make these dinners, and sometimes 40 or 50 kids would show up for these dinners. And that was fun. Neither of us are cooks, but we did our best. And then from that, we started working, co-sharing a job at Construction for Change, which is a construction nonprofit that works for other organizations around the world, building on behalf of the global poor and underserved. And so we don't know how to build anything. Don't ask Jenny and I to build, but we vetted all of their partners to make sure they could sustain a building for 30 years and that they in fact needed a building. So we did that for 3 years. And then as we launched the 3030 project, which we'll talk about, I think later, Jenny and her husband, Jason, did significant photography for us, but also Jenny was just a support person and traveled with us a lot. And then the book came out after that. And I was just struggling with the book, and I thought, I'll just have Jenny read it. And I knew you'd be honest, right?
Right.
She's like, well, it has potential. And then so she cut about a third of the book instantly. She was like, let's give them, a view through the window. Let's not walk them through the front door.
Well, that's a good way of doing it. An introduction.
That's kind of where that went. Anyway.
So that's pretty awesome. How sometimes you set your path, and sometimes maybe unconsciously you're setting your path in what you do and stuff. I know, Julie, I lived in Miami and Fort Lauderdale for quite a long time. And actually, my ex-wife was a psychotherapist with a specialty in treating HIV patients and kids in families with HIV, and saw horrible physical, mental health going on there in the 80s and the 90s, and death, a lot of it. And so many in our community, actually. In fact, our two youngest boys had two gay fellows as their nanny and effectively uncles and stuff. So we saw a lot in that time. Could you share your experience of living with HIV, and also in a couple of things there? Did you have any sense prior to the early 1990s diagnosis of anything there? And then what was your experience after being given, as you said, 3 to 5 years to live?
Well, I was well aware of HIV. I'm a health educator by profession. I also have a gay brother whose friends were dying, like a lot of his friends were dying. He lived in the Castro district for a while in San Francisco, and then he lived in Seattle. And I asked him many, many times, are you HIV positive? And he just would say, I'm fine, don't worry about me. But he never said no. So I kind of in the back of my mind thought this was a possibility for my brother. But really, I knew I'd had a blood transfusion. I knew that was one of the ways that you contracted HIV. And in 1989, I was really sick. I mean, I was having symptoms. but there was something in me that just did not want to even think that that could be a possibility. So I just didn't think about it. Yeah, so no, I guess that would be the answer to that. I didn't actually really think about having been infected with HIV before 1990. But the minute the blood bank called my doctor and suggested it, I absolutely knew I had it. It was just like I had had so many weird symptoms. I'd gone to the doctors so many times, different doctors, and they would do so many tests and say, you're in great health. You're just so tired. You have those 3 little kids. You're running yourself, your engine's running out. You just need to rest. And I've always had a lot of energy before that. So that just didn't make sense to me. So when they suggested it, I was like, this is what's wrong with me. This is it. So before I even went and got tested, I was pretty prepared that test would come back positive. What was the rest of your question?
It was basically, so then what was your experience then when you were given that time to live?
Well, I mean, it was a shock. And it took me a while. My brother, so I called my brother and I'm like, I have HIV from this blood transfusion. And he said, well, to tell you the truth, I'm in the same boat. He had been diagnosed 4 years earlier and and I was like, what do mom and dad say? And he's like, I'm not going to tell them. I'm not planning on telling them. And you could do that. You could say it's, pneumonia or cancer or whatever. You're not dying of HIV. You're dying of some disease you're getting or some thing you're getting because your immune system's not working, right? So he was a huge support for me. I mean, like he knew what to do. He knew where to go. And we just decided until we really understood what was happening, we just weren't going to tell anyone. So it was a lot. And yeah,
No,
it's something that with all of the social stigma, you just had to step back and learn and try to figure out how as a family are we going to work this out,
Yeah, I've seen many, especially in Florida, that were married with kids that were gay because they couldn't tell anybody, family or whatever. But then they would get HIV, and it obviously becomes a big deal. That's why I wanted to know, how did you handle being silent? Number one, how did you handle being silent? And then what happened to decide to use your story to make a difference for others in terms of the emotions of doing that? So many grief and loss and spirituality, caregiving, there's a lot going on there. So how did you handle being silent, and what made you decide to share?
Well, I mean, having a family secret is a lot of, there's a lot of stress to that, and it's exhausting, and you feel like you're lying a lot. Bring up, Scott was in Christian ministry at the time. So, it felt weird. I tried not to lie, but there was a lot of half-truths happening, just to keep people from asking what's wrong. And then we had weird responses. One woman was just kept asking, and she was on Scott's board of directors. And finally, I was like, let's just tell her and her husband. And her response was, let's just pretend it's cancer. Like she didn't, she didn't want it to go out there to our community. She didn't think our community could handle it. So it's like, let's just lie. So those kind of responses were just, what do you do with that, right? So why we went public, it was 4 years of really just individually deciding who I felt I could trust with the information. So individually telling people, and that is a lot of work because you also have to educate people, so that they're not afraid. And a lot of the people I knew didn't know a lot about HIV. So anyway, I started to reach out to the Spokane regional, the Spokane AIDS network, and they had a speakers bureau. So just anonymously, I would go listen to speakers. And being an educator, I really wanted to be a speaker. I could see the value of education in calming people's fears and also just keeping people from getting infected themselves. But I still never wanted to tell our kids. It just seemed like they never seemed old enough to me. But when Teresa was in the 4th grade, so she was 10 years old, I was getting ready for work. I'm literally like putting my earrings on to go to work. I worked at the health district, and she said, "How did your friend Mary die of AIDS?" And I said, "Oh, she had a blood transfusion." And I'm not even thinking about it. And she goes, "Mom, you had a blood transfusion." And I'm just like, oh crap, And she goes, "Well, could you have AIDS?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she goes, "Do you?" And I just went, "No, I don't." And I just sent her to school. And I'm like, at that point, I was only HIV positive. So it felt like a half lie, but it's like my kid was asking. So we thought about just telling her because Ryan was only 6 years old, but the stress of keeping a secret, I just didn't want to pass that on to my kids to have to keep something.
Mhm.
So that's, we told them that was in May, and we told them when they got out of school in June. And, when you tell a 6-year-old something, and I told them, this is not a secret. This is private information, and it's your information to share when you want to. Because I didn't want them to feel like they were in trouble. But you tell a 6-year-old, I mean, we're at Albertsons, and they're checking my groceries. And Ryan's like, "Does she know you have AIDS? The checker." And she's like, and I'm like, "Well, she does now, honey." But, like it was almost comic relief. You never knew
Right.
when it would be important for a 6-year-old to bring it up, So that sort of launched an era where I could join that Speakers Bureau that I was on for 10 years. So, yeah.
That's thank you for sharing that. That's amazing. And the relief in some respect, I guess, of sharing it and the kids putting it out. I mean, it's different story, but I remember people that I knew when they found out we had 2 gay guys taking care of our 2 little kids, and they would say, "Aren't you worried that they're touching them? Aren't you worried that they're breathing? Aren't you worried this?" And I'm saying, "Do I know you? I thought, do you have any idea? I'm more worried that they're going to give them something. My kids are going to give them something." So it's really when you said about education and whatnot, it really hits home. And even people that I wouldn't say people distance from us, but they were just weird, thought we were weird, thought we were just, how can you do that with your kids type of thing. It was crazy. It was crazy. And they both had HIV, the gay guys. So, and Jenny.
Well, I mean, good on them that they actually said something to you. I found that a lot of our friends just conveniently stopped coming over and never said a thing.
Yeah, that happened.
I mean, at least when people say something to you, there's a chance to like respond and educate and try to like,
right.
to really change that. But when they just conveniently stop coming by and don't interact with you anymore, that's harder to me.
It is harder, but at least then you know who the real person is also.
That's true.
And I was so proud of our kids. They would say, "Yeah, they've got that. They're our uncles."
That's great.
And it's so good for you for doing that. So Jenny, well, first of all, congrats on, I know you're a new mom relatively. So congrats on that. That's going to change your life too.
Yes, definitely.
So with that miracle now, you're a longtime friend of Julie. If you're looking back, share a little bit about your emotions about her, a really good friend, and based on what you knew, your whole experience and her whole experience.
So yeah, it was really interesting kind of revisiting some of these things. And for me, thinking back 20 years to, when I met Teresa in college and when she told me that her mom had AIDS. And and I grew up in Gig Harbor, suburb of Tacoma, and just kind of it seems like as we were working on the book, it seemed like very similar to like the vibe in Spokane in the 90s, and just that fear and the fear of the unknown, like like you're talking about, and just the fact that AIDS seemed so far away from us. So I think Julie was the first person that I knew who was like regularly in my life that was HIV positive. And I think what's so interesting to me is, obviously at that point, Teresa was 18 and it was just so matter of fact that, and I was like, oh, I've met Julie. I've been around her. Like, I'm not going to get anything from her. So, it wasn't ever weird in that way to me, but, it's funny because I think back and I feel like just, a few years before when I was learning about it in elementary school or whatever, it would have been weird. I would have been scared. And I think, it just want to commend Julie on the work that she did and sharing and educating people, because I think that is so important. And so many people just were so ignorant and honestly still are. And sorry, I feel like I'm just going off on a tangent and
You good time.
so let's like
No, that's
regroup with my thoughts here.
I appreciate you sharing that, because you're talking about how it would have been different before and being the first one. That's real emotions and real thinking in your mind, all the stuff that goes through your mind and everything. It's incredible. But yeah, moving on to something here. I was fortunate with my two younger boys to be in Seattle for the celebration on the accomplishments of the 30/30 project. Seeing your son Ryan with Macklemore perform, and even Sir Lancelot, like,
Sir Mix-a-Lot.
Yeah, that guy was there.
Funny.
By the way, they were really cool.
He's a Seattle icon. I mean, yeah. I mean, truthfully.
No, he is, and
he paved the road.
They were super, and the event was fantastic. The celebration was fantastic. They were great with my kids and all that. But tell us about the vision of the project. How you both engaged on it. And family and the community support, and also the amazing impact on multiple countries. Yeah. Share a little bit about all that.
So the 30/30 project, how it happened was in 2014, I was it was the 30th anniversary of me being infected with HIV, and my kids wanted to do something to celebrate. And I just felt weird about that because so many of my friends had died. I mean, so many of my friends had died. And so I said, well, we can do something as a family that's a give back kind of project that does something good for someone else in honor of all these people we knew who died. And my big idea, because Jenny and I at that time were working for Construction for Change. I said, let's just build a medical building somewhere around the world for an organization that, works with people who don't have healthcare access, and maybe in an area that has a high HIV incidence. And so we picked Partners in Health for that, based out of Boston. But at the time, Ryan was like, Mom, they were actually kind of blowing up as a band. And he's like, I just feel like we can't just build one. You've lived 30 years. Let's build 30. And I'm just having heart palpitations when he's like, let's just build 30. I mean, imagine doing 30 remodels on your own house. This is huge, right? And then imagine those are all in different countries, right? So somehow he got me to say yes to that. He made a very compelling video to launch, and we did an Indiegogo campaign. So that's how the 30/30 project started. It was I wanted it to be 5 years. But that was a huge undertaking. And the first few years, it went really slow because we're basically selling an idea. This is our idea, but nothing had happened. And it wasn't really until the third year, and we did hire my daughter Teresa as our director, which was so helpful. But the third year, we actually had measurement and evaluation. We had statistics coming out of our buildings that were real. It wasn't just, it's a catchment area of 20,000 people, but it was 6,000 people went into our building this month. We had numbers that were very real. And so the last couple of years, it really snowballed, and we did end in 5 years. You were at the very final event. at least for funding. Now, our last 2 buildings are being built right now because there was a delay with COVID in India and in Kenya where they are. But so we're, our bank account's going to be empty pretty soon because those buildings will be done this year. So we're very excited. It is, the actual conclusion is happening right now, even though our fundraising effort, those goals were met in 2019.
Yeah, I think it's spectacular. And I hope your executive director is doing well because we placed her there. So I hope
that's exciting. So overall, I mean, at the end of the day, what we ended up with was we built 30 healthcare facilities or projects in for 18 different organizations in 9 different countries. So it was quite an amazing thing. And, we didn't do it ourselves. Julie Lewis didn't do this. Like, this was a huge group effort of a lot of people. So,
and that leads me to the next point. And it's if you look back, we talked about as kids and whatnot, if you look back how things happen, you can find dots that connect to where we end up a lot of times. And, it's fascinating. And either of you, can answer this. Well, we founded Fifth Element on the premise that leaders in their businesses can do better when they're doing good. So are there financial or human supporters you want to recognize that have felt they've done better by being involved in supporting you, and you want to recognize them here?
Well, I mean, one of our biggest supporters, we had lots, but was the Macklemore and Ryan Lewis team. And Jenny, you want to talk about the Plus One?
Yeah. So basically there's an organization called Plus One that has this very simple idea. It was started, I believe, by somebody in Arcade Fire, right, Julie? Or they were a part of that band. Arcade Fire was a part of starting it. And the idea is basically, with concert tickets, there's already so many random little like fees and additions on there. They're like, well, let's just add $1 and
or a euro, depending on where you are.
Or yes, exactly. Or, whatever currency. Let's just add one, and then the band can decide, what NGO, charity, nonprofit that goes to. So for Macklemore and Ryan Lewis, when they were touring, that money, the Plus One money was going to the 30/30 project.
That's awesome. Yeah,
they funded 3. I mean, it was a significant amount of money. They funded probably 3 different buildings through that. The other big supporters we had, Expedia was a huge supporter. T-Mobile funded a whole building. We partnered with the Clinton Global Initiative in the Caribbean, and Alaska and Delta Airlines. I don't know if I should say this in the same sentence, but they were both very supportive, both promotionally and then financially. But the truth is, Mark, is that we raised millions of dollars, but most of that money was just from people. It was just from $20 here, $100 there. You were at our event. It's like, lots of people believed in this idea that healthcare spaces could create healthcare access. And, I love that your podcast is called Leaders Who Care. But I actually kind of learned through this that most people care. I think we go through seasons in our life when we have more capacity, both personally and in a business to do something big. But I think what I learned is most people want to care, and they do want to support good things.
Absolutely.
So that was one of the silver linings, was just the generosity of really freaking almost everyone we met.
Well, the way I look at it is there's leaders who care everywhere, basically. And it doesn't mean you're just a leader of a company or whatever. We're all be leaders who care and doing that. So I get totally what you're saying. And it's fantastic that the more people that are giving, the more people that feel good. And if they're feeling good, they're usually doing good elsewhere too. And that's the mindset that we need to get out there more and more and more. So you've been sharing your story, major TV networks, paparazzis outside your door all the time, international conferences, and around healthcare, empowering women, which we really believe in, and uplifting communities. Congrats on being a recipient of the Nelson Mandela Changemaker Award. I really admire him greatly for everything he did. And there's even your husband, who's a partner of mine at Fifth Element. bringing the experiences, the passion and expertise, out to achieve the impact. So with that, where I'm leading here is, can you share the exciting news about your book that's coming out?
Yes, we are very excited about our book. Right now, the advanced reader's copy is almost complete, which makes it like a real thing. Like, we've been working on this book for a couple of years, not full time, like, when we can.
Right.
So our book launches May 23rd. It's called Still Positive, and the pre-sales start in April. The book is to be truthful, I patterned this book off of the book Eat, Pray, Love, but it's nothing like it. But it has three distinct sections of my life. The first section is that 4 years of silence, and I think it's not just about HIV, it's about any family in crises or dealing with trauma. There's a lot of themes there that cross over. The middle section is about the community of people with HIV. Several people die in that section, but also, a lot of my friends never had obituaries. They went home to families that did not want people to know, and their stories just disappeared. And I just don't want that to happen. So I tell a lot of stories about people in my life in that section. And it's basically the 10 years I was on that Speakers Bureau. It's also the years my kids grew up. One of my friends who died, we became foster parents of her son for almost 4 years. So it's a little about blended families, like it can cross over to all kinds of blended families and the challenges, right? And then that last section is really more current. It's after we moved to Seattle. It's kind of about life after being a public HIV/AIDS educator. For another 10 years, I just did other jobs and I was a little burnout. And then it wasn't until we launched 30/30 Project that I reemerged as an HIV advocate. And it's about the project, about Ryan gaining the platform he did, and my daughter getting married on the Grammy Awards. Like, there's a lot of weird things in that last section because we've had a lot of really unique experiences. And it ends really in the era of COVID. So that's the book in a nutshell. I'll let
You want to talk
Jenny, what do you want to talk about?
Well, I just want to add, can I just add to that, that like kind of one of the most exciting things about all of this is that when Julie was diagnosed, she was given 3 to 5 years to live. And she was told if she lived 5 years, like the last few probably wouldn't be that great. And, when I met her, it was, 12 years after that diagnosis, she was still here. But Teresa did not expect her mom to be at her wedding. Teresa, it still seemed, HIV still seemed like a death sentence at that point. And, we've come such a long way. Medicine's come such a long way. Julie has come such a long way. And so I feel like, the double entendre with Still Positive is, even though this isn't like a self-help, like, let's be positive through every situation sort of a book. It's just like a celebration that, Julie's still here and she shouldn't be. Yeah. Or, I mean, you should be, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm glad
I wasn't expected to be.
It wasn't, it's not expected.
The other exciting thing about the book, for me, is I really wrote it as a tool to continue to be able to educate. And all of the proceeds, we are not making money at all on this book. All of the proceeds will go to healthcare organizations and efforts around increasing healthcare access issues and equity. That's what this book is about.
Well, what I love is it ties back to all you said before, telling your 9-year-old about it, going through the experience of at the cashier, and Ryan blurts out that real life stuff, being silent and not being silent. I think you're right. It's not just about being positive about everything that's not real. It's about going through life and the journey of it and how to experience it and everything. So congrats on that. And I can't wait to read the book and get it autographed, of course, right?
I'll autograph it for you.
So It's so wonderful what you're talking about. I want to ask you one more question. We mentioned COVID before. In the year 2021, one of my clients said to me, you know, Mark, the year 2020 was the year that flew by slowly. And I thought that was like an interesting comment. And especially since the last 3 years have been weird for a lot of people, you know, going slowly, going fast, and this and that. So with that said, and knowing about the last 3 years, what are you, each of you, most grateful for, and what are you most hopeful for?
Well, I mean, for Jenny and I, we have been extreme isolators. I mean, I have a compromised immune system and she's been pregnant. And so for the last couple of years, I mean, that was one of the great things about writing a book. We had something to do because we literally were the people who weren't leaving our house much and never went anywhere with a mask. So one of the things I'm very excited about and grateful about is that we are suddenly in the last 6 months being able to go places, interact, be out in public. I mean, I just felt like it was a really lonely time for me, having healthcare problems. So that's really what I'm grateful for. I always say, if having coffee with people what could be a hobby, I would excel at it. I mean, like I love my friends, I love my girlfriends, and I try to interact on that level a lot, but there was just a few years. I mean, I'm just so tired of Zoom. I can't even tell you. If there's an option to have an in-person meeting now, I just take it because I'm craving that, you know, interpersonal communication. So
Yeah, I feel you on that for sure. Jenny?
You know, COVID really threw everyone for a loop. I mean, I'm thankful because it did give me time to slow down and have a baby. In the early days of COVID, when everyone was isolating, my husband and I actually sort of got the ball rolling with a giant COVID fundraiser. And so I actually really learned, you know, what you can do from home. And just to go back to, you know, leaders who care and that idea, like, it's when you give people the opportunity, especially in that time in COVID, when everyone's sitting around saying, what can I do? Like, is there anything I can do? And twiddling their thumbs as at home, we were able to do this giant like online COVID fundraiser that was specifically for the state of Washington. And we actually ended up raising 110 million for COVID relief. And I'm absolutely like just humbled and honored to have been a part of something that you know, was able to bring so much good to people in such a hard time, you know, from making sure food banks were funded to getting internet and you know, iPads and stuff to kids to be able to do online school, and so much more beyond that, to like kind of help with all of the, you know, long-term effects of COVID in the state of Washington. And yeah, again, it was just such an awesome opportunity to just like again, that leaders who care, it was just asking. So many people were so excited to give. And so many like large organizations and companies within the state of Washington were excited to be a part of it. And it was just, you know, kind of organizing and asking. And yeah.
No, that's great. I'm super grateful that you both are leaders who care, and I think you've shown it not just in recently with the book, but in the whole experiences you're talking about right from day one. You've been showing it knowingly or not knowingly, so I'm super grateful for that, and that I'm really hopeful that you keep, you know, engaging with other leaders who care over coffee in person and making more impact in the world. So it's super lovely to have you on this. Thanks for sharing all of it. Everybody needs to go buy the book and be still positive all the way. And so just thank you for joining us on the Leaders Who Care series. We really, really appreciate it.
thank you, Mark, for having us.
Thanks so much for having us.